What's up, you guys? I'm Dan. This is Frugal Not Cheap, and today we're talking about why you shouldn't listen to the news. Have you ever noticed that news headlines are kind of a downer? No, really, if you think about it, they're mostly negative. That's completely intentional. Why are most headlines negative? Well, it has to do with human psychology. There are a number of biases that we all fall prey to. I was recently watching a video by Joe Scott on YouTube that talked about many of these biases. He called them ways that your mind is lying to you. And that's essentially what's going on, is that your mind is using some heuristics, some survival strategies, different tools that can be helpful at times, but also are really skewing the way that we look at things. I'll link Joe's video in the description below. I'm not actually sure if he talked about the particular bias that we'll be talking about today, though, and that is called negativity bias. The negativity bias, also known as the negativity effect, is the notion that, even when of equal intensity, things of a more negative nature, e.g., unpleasant thoughts, emotions, or social interactions, harmful or traumatic events, have a greater effect on one's psychological state and processes than neutral or positive things. So, in other words, we remember the bad stuff and we don't pay so much attention to the good stuff, right? People say they prefer good news, but really they pay a lot more attention to the bad news. And if you think about it, this makes a lot of sense. Take any given day when resources were scarce a long time ago and life was difficult. It was much more important to pay attention to the negative things, the scares, and remember those, the time that there was a mountain lion attack or the time there was a famine and how to avoid that. Much more important to focus on those for survival than it would be for all the small pleasantries that you might have seen or noticed during your day. Much less impactful in terms of your survival. So, why do the news agencies use this negativity bias? Why are all these headlines negative? Is it just to grab our attention? Well, kind of. It is important to get our attention so that we'll look at those headlines. But what they're really after these days is for us to click on those headlines and get to the actual story and have that page load up ads, which in turn generate revenue for them. So financial incentives are extremely powerful. Throughout most of my videos, I'll be talking about how financial incentives can shape our behavior. But in this case, it is a financial incentive that's very, very powerful that's driving the use of negativity bias by the news sources. This wasn't always a problem, or at least not to the degree that it is now. And why is that? Again, that's because financial incentives have changed. So the sources of revenue for a newspaper in the past were the sales of the newspaper issue themselves, newspaper subscribers, and also classified ads. So let's look at each of those three and then compare them to the way that things are now, and we'll see a key difference. So first we have the subscriptions, right? That's going to be revenue that's coming from an individual that's attached to an entire year's worth of newspaper. So that's revenue that doesn't have anything to do with what's the content within each newspaper or each issue even. So that's just a steady stream of income. Then the second are sales of individual papers, say like to the newsstand owners, and this will be kind of related to how how many copies are sold from each newsstand is going to generate more demand for the paper as a whole, right? So we can zoom down to the level of each newspaper issue, and so here we see a small incentive, and that is for newspaper headlines for the front page of the newspaper to be exciting. And so of course it's very famously known that the front page story is going to be something that grabs your attention. And so here we do see the negativity bias at play, even in the past. The most bombastic, most eye-grabbing, catching stories, those are the ones that made the front page. But after that, there are really no major incentives to have these bombastic or eye-grabbing or what we now think of as clickbaity titles. And then within that newspaper, you had the classified ads. And so you get lots of revenue from that as well. But again, that ad revenue is tied to the entire issue of the newspaper. And so it's not connected to any individual story. Whereas today, there are ads on the actual page for an individual article. So there's an incentive to use clickbait titles so that you click on an article and load up all the ads that are on that page there. So it's very, very different from the way that things were in the past. And this financial incentive has ramped up the amount of negativity in the headlines that are out there. And of course, with the death of print, not completely dead, mind you, but there's been definitely a large reduction in the number of print subscribers to news media and to all kinds of media as well, has really made these incentives even more powerful because most of the revenue now is coming from online. All right, so what's the big deal, right? So all the news is negative and it's kind of a downer. Well, that is kind of a problem. It doesn't give you a really nice picture of the world when all of the stories that you're reading, all the news that you're getting, is all negative, right? It makes the world look like a darker, less inviting, hospitable place in general. So it can make the world look pretty bleak. But it's even more of a problem when it comes to investing. You see, the best investor is a dead one. What that means is it's someone that's not going to change their behavior based on the news that's coming. Someone who's a buy and hold investor. There's actual data behind this, that the 401k or retirement accounts for dead investors actually outperformed those from people that were alive who were reacting to all the news, either saying this is the time to buy or, freaking out and this is a terrible time to be in the market, you should pull everything out. Those people ended up losing money, of course, whereas those investors that were dead, those portfolios ended up performing quite well because they just held on no matter what. So personally, what I do, I invest in broad, low-fee index funds. Just set them and forget them. That's what I do. It's not investment advice. This is just for entertainment purposes. But that's what I do, and it's going well for me. And so a very important thing for me is not to react to the news and buy and sell. So we can kind of picture how this would work. Let's say things are going well in the stock market, for instance. When things are going well, everyone seems to be bullish. Your hairdresser's talking about all the stocks that they're buying. And so, of course, there's a lot of demand for stocks then, and it is possible that values may be overinflated at the time. But if you follow the psychology, if you follow the news that's telling you what to do, you'll end up buying more at that time. Whereas the long-term investor, the one that doesn't listen to the news like me, will just buy on a set schedule. As the cash flows come in, I invest on a regular schedule. Set it and forget it. I don't even have to think about it. My investments are just happening. Doesn't matter what the news is saying, what the PE ratios are, none of that. So you're buying in at a time when the market is kind of hot, right? So we're over here, say. Then let's say that there's a downturn. And so now, valuations are taking a plunge. And of course, what's going to happen is all the news stories now are going to become very, very bearish. And your hairdresser is going to be screaming about how much money they lost and saying, I should never play with the stock market. And they're going to be selling. And so all these negative news stories then might push you to panic sell. So you would have bought here, you would have sold here. And now let's say that the market takes its turn back and it corrects, which is generally what's going to happen in the long run. Stocks go like this. So bought here, sold here, stocks start coming back up, but it's going to be a while before you start seeing the rosy tones in the news. And so valuations might even nearly recover before you finally say, all right, now, all the news is positive, I'm going to buy. And you buy in here. You would have gotten killed by buying high, selling low, and then buying high yet again. So really following the mass psychology or following the news ends up being exactly the opposite of what you want to do in terms of your investment. If you could be perfect, if you were this amazing oracle, right, you would do what the Oracle of Omaha says, Warren Buffett. He says you should be greedy when others are fearful. That means buying at the lows, and then be fearful when others are greedy, which is, to be careful here about when things are frothy at the top. But I don't believe in market timing. I think it's a fool's errand. I think the data shows that it's a fool's errand. And so again, I'm just a set it and forget it long-term investor. I don't listen to the news when it comes to my investments. Certainly I have to pay attention to the news for other things like my job, for instance, or just being an informed citizen or person in the world. But when it comes to investing, I completely ignore that stuff. I set everything automatically in terms of my investments so that there's no opportunity for me to mess with that when I see some news items that say that the sky is falling or that, we're in some new golden age or what have you. As an example of how powerful this concept is, I titled this video, "Don't Listen to the News!" when I could have titled the video, "Negativity Bias in News Headlines and Their Impact on Investor Behavior." Sure, I could have titled that, it would have been more accurate, but it would have been a lot less interesting, right? A lot less grabby. So even I am prey to those incentives, even though this channel's not yet monetized, it's too young. But you can bet that if it was, then the incentive would be much stronger. And so you might find that some YouTubers out there tend to have these sort of clickbaity type headlines, and it's just because it works. And it's unfortunate. I'm going to try my best to toe the line and not to go over into where it's a grabby headline, but not in a way that is disingenuous or it's being dishonest in some way. That's something where I don't want to veer into that territory. Have you noticed this negativity bias? What other biases do you see at play in investing? Let us know in the comments below. If you like this video, hit the like button. If you'd like to see more videos on frugality, investing, financial independence, and travel, hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell if you'd like to be notified when new videos are posted. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.